am I'm Cheryl Joseph-Lukz, and I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor. And I've been working with the loss program and Catholic Charities for a long time now, about 15 years with Catholic Charities. I've been a therapist for 25 years. And I find this work so very rewarding. The reason I truly love the loss program is that we are a community of learners. And we hope to guide people along their grief journey. And I know I have learned as much as anyone from our facilitators, from our survivors on how to navigate grief and traumatic grief, how to keep going, right? You know, so and then also, of course, our fellow clinicians and colleagues. I'm always learning, so I'm grateful to all of you. Again, we're here to talk about forgiveness and grief, healing our inner wounds with forgiveness. And this again is the Loss Program's first Monday speaker series. Happy October and pumpkin spice everything. And so you know, I am part of the MTV generation, and many of you might be also. And so I really believe that after work, we're driving home, we're catching the train, we're all stressed out. And so I think it's helpful to have a meditation to sort of unplug from the busyness of the world and our lives and kind of calm down. And so being part of that MTV generation, I'm going to share with you a video and music to help you unplug from the stress of the day and to kind of bring mind, body, and soul into this process. All right, so this is, Emily is very shortly is going to turn on a video and you'll understand the music, and who doesn't like a little Don Henley? We all do. This is a good time to maybe grab a pen and paper. There is an exercise that I'll have you do, a brief one. So that's a good time to do that, or to grab maybe, you know, some tea or something to drink. But even if you just want to sit there and close your eyes and absorb what's happening, and just listen to the words of the music, you don't have to watch the video. That's okay too. So whatever it takes to kind of calm down, settle back into our bodies, and then partake in this process. So all right, go ahead, Emily. We can listen to it. I'm a therapist with the Loss Program, and I welcome you all here. I understand that many of you here have had some life experience that brings you here to think about forgiveness and think about what to do, what to do with those feelings. Many of you have suffered throughout your life a loss of something, a person, a job, a lost dream. And so, you know, we come here hoping to find a way to unpack the complexity that is grief, trauma, and forgiveness. And so we're gonna begin now, if you would, Emily. Okay, again, so we're going to talk about the fundamentals of forgiveness, the challenges and the gifts. All right. So to start off, please know that this is a place of no judgment, right? That I'm not here to tell you how to feel. No one can tell you how to feel. I am certainly not going to tell you how to feel, and we must feel to heal. There have been studies done about forgiveness, and there are cultures and communities all over the world that in some religions that force forgiveness. And what researchers have found is that whenever forgiveness is forced in some kind of a ritual or some kind of grieving ceremony, it leaves the victim or person who has received some kind of unkind act, it leaves them worse off than before. So it has to be sought after on your own accord. And so again, we're not here to tell you how to feel, and this has to come when you're ready. And forgiveness requires grieving what we experienced. That is universally what all researchers say, that we have to grieve first in order for forgiveness to occur. Okay. So I want you to pause a moment. Maybe pull yourself away from any distractions. If you have a pen and paper, please, this is a good time to do it. If you'd rather do it on, type it out, that's fine. But consider a person, situation, or event which has hurt you in the past, and toward which you have held on to feelings of anger, bitterness, or resentment. On a piece of paper, write down that person, situation, or event. Please do that now. Write down some person, situation, or event. It could have happened a day ago, a year ago, 10 years ago. Notice how you feel as you remember that person, situation, or event. And if you could please mute yourselves, I would really appreciate that. Thank you. All right, so everybody, write down a person, situation, or event that in which you harbor some anger, bitterness, or resentment, or intense sadness, and you're not quite untangled what you know how to feel about it. All right, and really think about how you're feeling. All right, next slide. All right, now I want to rate your motivation to forgive that experience on a scale of 1 to 4. Okay, so 1, I will not pursue forgiveness. What happened is unforgivable. That's 1. Now you can be a 1.2 or 1.5 or 2.7 or 3.1. You can be a 0. But basically somewhere on this scale. So that's 1. I will not pursue forgiveness. What happened is unforgivable. Number 2. I am unsure. I am tired of having the event replay over and over in my head. Some people call these intrusive thoughts, ruminations, toiling. All right. Number 3, I am considering forgiveness, but don't know how to do it. You are in the right place if you're right around number 3. 4, I am ready to forgive. I plan to take steps toward forgiveness. And hopefully we'll talk about, how you're going to do that. Okay. All right. So what is forgiveness? There's lots of definitions of this. Fred Luskin talks about, defining forgiveness is like defining love and happiness, right? It's hard to do because we really can't ever quite define it. But forgiveness, from Wikipedia, forgiveness is in a psychological sense, is the intentional, involuntary process by which one who may initially feel victimized undergoes a change in feelings and attitude regarding a given offense and overcomes negative emotions such as resentment and vengeance. Theorists differ, however, in the extent to which they believe forgiveness also implies replacing the negative emotions with positive attitudes. In certain legal contexts, forgiveness is a term for absolving or giving up all claims on account of debt, loan, obligation, or other claims. So, I really want you to think about, what forgiveness means to you or what you have traditionally thought it to be. And, Luskin always talks about that it's getting comfortable with the word no, meaning I had hoped things had gone this way in the world, or this person told me no. And so we have to sit with that disappointment, with that setback. And so I think it's, it really is mind, body, and spirit, which reacts to some grievance or some event that happens. Okay. All right, so a large portion of this talk is based on the work of Fred Luskin, and he's a psychologist from Stanford, and he did a great deal of work with in Northern Ireland, in war-torn Northern Ireland, with the Catholics and Protestants. And he conducted 3 separate studies, him and his group, the Stanford Forgiveness Project, it was called, when he was a graduate student. And then he stayed on to teach at Stanford. People who were suffering with betrayals, their children, their husbands, their uncles, their families were killed in war-torn Northern Ireland, and they were just not able to, the wars kept happening, and they wanted to forgive but didn't know how. And so he investigated ways for them to think about forgiveness, and based on prior studies and what are the benefits of forgiveness. And then, it opened up this idea that forgiveness isn't what people think it is. So he describes it as forgiveness is about your healing and not about the people who hurt you. Forgiveness is taking responsibility for how you feel. It is taking back your power. It is for you and not the offender. It helps you get control over your feelings. It can improve your mental and physical health. It is a choice and is a trainable skill, just like learning to throw a baseball. And that's kind of his swan song. He talks about that it is teachable. And many people find a way to forgive the most heinous crimes or injustices they experience. And so that's what his research is about. Forgiveness helps you stop telling the grievance story. Okay, and now what it is not, right? Forgiveness is not condoning unkindness. It is not forgetting that something painful happened. It's not excusing poor behavior. We would never tell someone to go back to an abuser. We're not, but it may be getting them to see the humanness. That some transgressions are the result of, errors in judgment, or a person's childhood experiences, or again, we don't condone them, but there is something that can inform the process about why someone did what they did. And so there's another theorist that talks about Smead, who talks about that he states that it is essential that we see all human beings as fallible, right? In that they are human. And when we stop seeing them as human, we can't forgive, right? So again, it's not denying or minimizing your hurt. It does not have to be a religious experience. He's a secular, Fred Luskin is a secular teacher, and he's a professor. So it has nothing to do with religion for him. It does not mean reconciling with your offender. It does not mean you give up having feelings. It acknowledges that we can't change the past. He's famous for saying it's an immutable fact, right? That something happened, and we don't deny that it happened or change that it happened. We change our response to it, to allow our body, our minds, and our spirits to heal. Forgiveness research shows that people retain their ability to be angry, but simply use that ability wisely. And there's a Wisconsin researcher by the name of Enright, Robert Enright. And he is known for his research in in personalities that that find it easier to forgive and those that don't, that have more difficulty forgiving. Robert Enright. And he founded the International Forgiveness Institute. And he has initiated many studies in forgiveness. And he developed a 20-step process model of forgiveness. And again, his name is Robert Enright. I don't cover his work here. I use a 9-step process. But he's focused on that people who were generally, and not just initially, but people who hung on to their grievances, and even after being exposed to ways to forgive, were less likely to do so. And for some reason, their anger or prior hostile experiences as the victim of some abuse, or people who are sort of disagreeable in nature, they had the hardest time to forgive, even after a long time had passed. And so they were like more likely to avoid their transgressor and want to enact revenge on them, even 2.5 years after that transgression. And so people who forgive, he found, tend to be, even if it's a very difficult process, and again, those that hold their resentments and then find a way out of it tend to be happier and healthier. And that, again, this is studies from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. But if you're at all interested in that, it's if you look up Dr. Robert Enright, really good studies about that. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide. All right, Lewis Smedes talks about the challenges to forgiving, and he wrote a book called The Art of Forgiving. It's a very good book, and he talks about the importance of the grievance story. Some of it's true and some of it's subjective, and we overly identify with that anger. We become intertwined with the narrative of that story, and Luskin would even say that it now becomes part of our personality. We can't untangle what happened and how we feel. And sometimes we get stuck in this feeling. So we look for evidence to keep it going, right? It becomes our narrative. And so if you think about where you placed your number, if you were 1, 2, 3, or 4, anywhere on there, and it's like, okay, how do I move? Obviously the goal is to move from 1, as closer to 4. And again, there's no cheap pass to this, right? We have to feel to heal, and we have to feel the grievance. We must feel and grieve what happened. But it's human nature. We all do it. It's human nature to blame someone when we are hurting. Smedes also says that it feels good to be angry sometimes, and it gives us energy and purpose, right? We get clouded by the veil of negativity. Our brains keep a ledger of the wrongs done to us. All right, so I once heard it said, we have that cute boxer right there. I once heard it said that the anger, sadness, resentment, and grievances we carry are like a guard dog trying to protect us from the pain of the loss and hurt. It's a shield from trauma and pain. It takes enormous courage and energy to face the pain and losses we have experienced. All right, so, it's important to know that this is not a flip we switch, right? So this is a gradual process. It definitely is not flipping a switch. It may take days, weeks, months, or years to fully forgive. And so I want to remind you, I'm not here to tell you how to feel, tell you how long it should take you. But again, when you are ready and the time is right, I invite you to begin the process of letting it go. All right, so now we're going to watch a video. It's a lecture by Frederick Luskin, Dr. Frederick Luskin, and it's about a 6-7 minute video, and he'll weigh in on this very topic, grief and forgiveness.
at the most basic level, forgiveness is on a continuum with grief. And the way I hold it now and understand it is that when you're offended or hurt or violated or whatever it is, the natural response is to grieve. And there needs to be, for almost everyone, some grief before forgiveness. That forgiveness is the resolution of grief. That there's an injury, there's a hurt, there's a something. And it's all based on loss. Whether we lose affection, or whether we lose a human being, or whether we lose a dream, it's all loss-based. And when we lose something, it seems very obvious to me that human beings have a natural reintegration process, which we call grief. And the stages of that are, not always followed and irregular and circular, but there's something to do with anger and sadness and, some denial and bargaining and all that other stuff. But the true resolution of grief is to forgive it, is to fully release one's sense of harm and victimhood from the experience. However, the problem is twofold. Some people never grieve, and some people grieve for 47 years. And they're both inadequate. They're both inadequate responses. They're both not deeply human. A deep human being feels pain. The deep human being suffers and allows oneself to suffer because that's part of this experience, as John Kabat-Zinn calls the full catastrophe. The deep human being also lets go of their suffering. Doesn't maintain it forever, doesn't create a personality structure around it, doesn't use it as a weapon. But without the grief, without acknowledging that I've been wounded and that something has been lost for me, you don't gain the benefit of the experience. You don't give yourself the possibility of the reintegration, which is I've been hurt and I've been mistreated and I may even have suffered a catastrophic loss, and I've healed. And so there's a power that comes from the experience rather than a clinging to the negative part of it so that you can have something to blame or hold accountable for your failures. Those are very different experiences. The first step of grief, at least from a forgiveness point of view, is to fully acknowledge the harm done, whether by you or somebody else, and to own the fact that there's a loss. That something that I would have wanted is not there, and it hurts. The second step of the grief process is to experience the feelings that are normally associated with the experience. So it's not enough to just walk in and say, hey, I was beaten for 12 years and, I want to get over it. And you ask them, well, how long you've been miserable about it? And they say never. Well, they're going to have to be miserable before they let it go. Because it's a full body, deep experience of suffering that when you forgive, you understand that there are other options besides continued suffering, but it doesn't mean you don't suffer. I've never met anybody who has had real loss that doesn't suffer at some level, unless, you use the manic solution, which is I just keep myself so busy and preoccupied that I'll never feel. But the second piece of grief is, have you felt some degree of the range of experiences? So have you been angry? Have you been unhappy? Have you been scared? Have you tried bargaining? Again, you don't have to spend months in them. but people will often, dissociate or suppress parts of themselves. And it's usually better to help them integrate those, feel it, before you ask them to let it go. Right? Because what you're letting go is the full-bodied response. You're not letting go of the event. That's immutable. But you can transform the response. And the last piece of the grieving that has to be there is, at least in my point of view, is it can't be a secret. I try not to let people forgive stuff that they haven't shared. Because there's such good research about resilience that people who go through harmful experiences and don't tell anybody have much worse consequences than people who tell people. The human connection is central to healing. Now, you reach a point in grief where forgiveness can facilitate it. But if, I've had people come into a workshop, I had one woman, and it almost broke my heart, because this was very early on in my experience, is she came in and she said, I need to forgive the fact that somebody murdered my son. And I remember this was at the complementary medicine clinic at Stanford, and I was still new, and I didn't know what to say. I hadn't done work with families of murder victims yet, and so I didn't know what to say. And then the only thing I could say was, well, when did it happen? And she said, a month ago. And I said, go home. This is not what you need now. Come back in 2 years. Come back when you've done the hard, the unimaginable work of grieving that loss, then forgive it.
Thank you, Emily. All right, so you can go to the next. Thank you. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so he offers some ideas, and we're gonna look at the his 9-step process for forgiveness in a moment. But I think it's important to note that most researchers will say that it's really, even though we're talking about forgiveness, the goal can't only be forgiveness. It really has to be, because some people really don't necessarily deserve our forgiveness, but we do. And I think that's where the focus has to be. Do I want to ruminate and sit with this hurt, or numb, avoid people, avoid situations, avoid the feelings? So the focus has to be on self-compassion. And Belruth Naparstek does a lot of guided imagery, and she talks about developing eyes of compassion for the self, because most of us will have compassion for a friend, a relative. We send money to GoFundMe pages when traumatic things happen and setbacks happen for people, but we don't necessarily have that kind of compassion for ourselves to maybe have an effective response and not carry around these feelings. And so if you think about it as, if you are, there's an example in his book about if you are an air traffic controller, which is obviously a very stressful job, one of the most stressful jobs, and your job is to land 300 planes during your work day. If you think of every single plane in the air, so there's 300 planes in the air, and during your shift, you've got to land 300. And if you think of every single airplane up there as a grievance you have about something, it could be a small grievance, it can be a large, like I had a terrible childhood, or I had an abusive mother, or an alcoholic father, or I lost someone very important to me, or someone betrayed me. And if you think about each grievance you carry around as a plane in the air, you know how stressful it is. And if you land, if forgiving means you're landing each one of those planes, you are reducing the amount of stress in your life. And so it's that idea of Buddhists talk about carrying a backpack of rocks, right? And every time you forgive somebody, you're lightening your load and putting a rock down on the ground. And so maybe if you think about it that way, and again, as he said, premature forgiveness doesn't do you any good either, because that's just cheap. That's a cheap pass, right? And you do have to suffer. We have to feel it, and then decide, okay, I'm done grieving, and I want to put this down and live. All right, the HEAL method of forgiveness by Luskin is H stands for hope. So you have to make a strong hope statement, right? Even if you don't fully believe it. You know, it's like, all right, so what happened? I wanted my relationship with John to last, right? Or I thought that, you know, that was my dream job. Why did I get fired? Right? You know, somebody left you. Somebody, you know, rejected you. So I think you have to first make a strong hope statement. This was my hope that was destroyed. Somebody took a sledgehammer to my dream, or to my love, or to my generosity. E is educate. Educate ourselves about the way the world really works. Not all relationships work out, right? So that decision to say, all right, so I have this subjective hurt, but truth be told, right? Not all relationships work out. Not all jobs work out. For many survivors here, right? We did not choose or want our loved one to leave us. And the groups certainly help us to bear witness to one another's pain, and to understand that we're not alone, right? So that connection is very healing, right? And rather than isolate, it helps us to feel connected to others, and that promotes our healing. So it's availing ourselves to those connections, even though we would rather just, you know, stay in bed and put the covers over our heads. A stands for affirm. Affirm your positive intention. Wayne Dyer talks a lot about stay true to your positive intention, right? Shift your focus to life goals and growth, and not on hurts. Now they can be connected to the hurts, such as celebrating the life of someone, or honoring the life of someone that we lost, or honoring maybe a quality that the person who we loved or we once loved, if they're no longer in our life. You know, how can we honor them, right? You know, almost honor their memory, or honor what used to be, if it's a family member that's still alive. So that you're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, basically. So affirm your positive intention. And then L stands for long-term. It's a commitment to your long-range well-being, right? You deserve. Focus on your own self-compassion and ability to move through this suffering, to move through the fog, to move through the pain. And by using this HEAL method, he's convincing survivors that that you can learn new skills or a new routine. Okay. All right, so the 9 steps to forgiveness. All right, I always like to begin with the end in mind, right? I'm the kind that reads the end of the book before I'm reading a mystery. I go to the end, I read it, and then I'm like, okay, how did they get there, right? So I like to unpack things and then just make my decision, right? So it doesn't destroy the book for me. So, all right, so 1, know exactly how you feel about what happened, and be able to articulate what about the situation is not okay. This is key in his work, and even in the work by other researchers, that we, you know, and it's probably why in loss we have groups, right? It's so important to share your pain, and to Maybe, talk ad nauseum to a trusted friend or a group, or write a few people about that you trust about your experience. Because we acknowledge that it happened, right? And that it was wrong and there was an injustice done to us. It gives it voice, right? It's cathartic. All right, so make a commitment to yourself. Number 2, make a commitment to yourself to do what you have to do to feel better. Forgiveness is for you and not for anyone else. Remember, self-compassion, right? Eyes of compassion for the self. Sometimes we have to forgive ourselves, right? For how we feel that we got bamboozled, that we didn't see something coming, right? Because we're only human and we only know what we're aware of. Number 3, forgiveness does not necessarily mean reconciliation with the person that hurt you or condoning of their actions. What you are after is to find peace. Forgiveness can be defined as the peace and understanding that came from blaming that which has hurt you less. You want to blame less. Taking the life experience less personally in changing your grievance story. Number 4, get the right perspective on what is happening. Recognize that your primary distress is coming from the hurt feelings and the loss, of course, thoughts and physical upset you are suffering now, not what offended you or hurt you 2 minutes or 10 years ago. Forgiveness helps to heal those hurt feelings. So, of course, if we have lost a person and there was a traumatic loss, it may take a little longer. And you heard what he said about to the woman whose son was murdered, come back in 2 years, right? In jest, but still that it can take some time. But again, we have to keep thinking, what can I hope for? Right? Because none of us here want you to sign on to a life of suffering, right? All right. So number 5, at the moment you feel upset, practice a simple stress management technique to soothe your body's flight or fight response. Some of you may be familiar with Francine Shapiro. She did EMDR, eye movement, resensitization, or desensitization movement. And basically, it's some tapping that she did. She was raped when she was 17, and she was a psychiatrist, and she kept coming back to these memories, these intrusive thoughts and flashbacks. And she thought, I'm doing yoga, I'm running, I have a great life. I thought I was over that. But she felt that she needed some to actually just move the memory. The AMA originally didn't support her work, and then they found that it worked, right? It's like moving that memory around into a different area of the brain, right? And then their energy medicine came after that, kind of as an adjunct to that. And some of my clients, I teach them this exercise, and all of us can do it right now. And it's basically sitting with your feet flat on the floor. And you could do it any way you like. But the idea is to speak aloud and tap the body at the same time, so that you are speaking your truth and speaking your grievance or your horror or your deep, intense sadness and longing to maybe see someone that's gone, or restore something in your life that's been broken or removed from you. And the idea is and they do this in, I've seen it done with groups of children who have experienced some kind of sexual abuse. They've witnessed a murder. They found their loved one who has died, and they do it in these big groups, and it's very helpful, and a lot of people to decrease the flooded feeling, or to get back into the room. And so basically, you sit and you can cross your hands here. You can also put them on your thighs, on top of your thighs, or anywhere you like. And so you sit like this, and you would repeat after me. you do this, right? To kind of, it's almost like if you get a massage, right? They might pound your back or wake up your muscles a little bit, right? And so you're kind of getting your heart rate into a place of regularity, right? I like to do a flat finger where there's some padding. Some people do the claw, but you can do this and you just say, my story is sad. And then you would repeat that. My story is sad. I lost my child to suicide. Or I lost my job and I'm scared to death about how I'm going to pay the mortgage. My boyfriend broke up with me. My husband cheated on me. My wife, embezzled money from her work. Whatever it is. All right. And then, so you talk out your story and you're kind of comforting yourself. And then here's the energy part. Then you put your hands together and then you keep saying, I am upset. This is terrible. I'm so angry and hurt. You can name your feelings, right? And then you end with, but I'm resilient. I'm creative. I can find my way. I've had setbacks before. My grandparents were immigrants and they came here to this country with nothing. Okay, I have resiliency. I can tolerate this and I'll be okay. And I'll find my way, right? And then you put the heat on your heart. And sometimes they'll put the heat, if they were sexually molested, over your private parts, your genitals, wherever it is. If there's if you were injured, say you were shot, you might put them over that injury. And so the idea is just to kind of get back in the room, get back into your body, right? And to think about how you will survive this, right? So you want to set your gaze on your positive intention to get better, to heal. All right, so that's one stress management. There's others, like Aaron Beck is a cognitive behavioral theorist, and he talks about bouncing a ball. I'm a tennis player, so I like the fuzzy tennis ball. My clients know this, and I always suggest to them, look, they're like $287 at Walmart for a pack of 3, right? Maybe like $317 now. And so there's some give, and they're fuzzy, and you hold them, and there's some give, but not a lot. And then you bounce it, and you hear that, right? You can do it with a ping pong, thing. You can 2 dice in each hand or 2 quarters. But they find that when facing trauma, anger, when intrusive thoughts or the grievance comes up and we're flooded with whatever feelings we're feeling, some kind of rhythmic movement, basketball, dancing, Tai Chi, right? I like Tai Chi, that's a good one. Yoga, you have to think about ways to reduce the flooded feelings so you can get back to your positive intention. All right, so number 6, give up expecting things from other people or your life that they do not choose to give to you. Recognize the unenforceable rules you have for your health or how you or other people must behave. Remind yourself that you can hope for health, love, peace, and prosperity and work hard to get them. All right. Number 7, put your energy into looking for another way to get your positive goals met than through the experience that has hurt you. Instead of mentally replaying your hurt, seek out new ways to get what you want. 8, remember that a life well lived is your best revenge. Instead of focusing on your wounded feelings and thereby giving the person who caused your pain power over you, learn to look for love, beauty, and kindness around you. Forgiveness is about personal power. And Dr. Luskin talks about the wider truth. And you really have to think about that, because he's like, the wider truth is that you may have food in your refrigerator. We breathe clean air. Simple things, right? And this idea that, that by focusing only on the person who left you for whatever reason, or who didn't love you the way you needed loved, didn't treat you fairly, embarrassed you, stole from you, hurt you physically, literally or figuratively, that we miss the wider truth, which is that there are people who love you. There are, even if you have to pull them up in your mind's eye, which is another exercise where you sit down and you pull into the room all the people who ever loved you, right? And you can, close your eyes and do that. And I might think of a neighbor or my second grade teacher who told me that my writing is beautiful, right? And just by closing my eyes, I can materialize that. And we do this in grief work too. I often tell my clients that, if you close your eyes, this is another Wayne Dyerism, and you cut a lemon, my mouth actually starts to water, right? I can cut a lemon and my mouth starts watering in my mind's eye, right? So I can do the same thing with calling up people who have been good to me, alongside of the person who rejected me or bullied me or abused me. And in the idea is that we have resources and a wider truth that we can access. And this is part of the healing. That's why it can take some time sometimes to deal with those flooded feelings, right? So again, we go back up to 5, simple stress management techniques for when you're flooded and anxious and upset and traumatized, right? And so again, 2 big scoops of patience for yourself. It's pretty important that you're patient and you have self-compassion because this can be an arduous process. Okay. All right, number 9. Oh, sorry about that. Number 9, amend your grievance story to remind you of the heroic and healing choice to forgive, right? So the idea is to amend your grievance story. That's what we're trying to do, right? Is to let go of it over time. It doesn't, again, we're not flipping a switch, it's over time. Thank you, Emily. Go right ahead. All right, so Dr. Ira Bayek, he is a palliative care physician, and he teaches at Dartmouth and he also was a medical director at a clinic in California. And he talks about in his work in palliative care, end of life care and hospice, how there are 4 phrases that these are the 4 things that matter most, and none of them are things. If you see, right? None of those are things. No one said, yeah, you can have my Ferrari. Or, who gets the house? I mean, nobody talks about that on their deathbed, right? And so that's what he's talking about. He's saying, he spreads this message that the things that people talk about are not things. And he stresses that we really have to use these phrases in everyday life. So that's why it's a book about living, right? And there's 11 words here, right? And they matter, in saying them matter, right? So please forgive me, I forgive you, thank you, and I love you. They all seem simple enough, right? And he said, when people say, oh, mom knows, like, so mom is dying and the family surrounds her bed. And he said, inevitably someone will say, one of the older, oh, doc, don't worry. Our mom knows we love her and we've appreciated all she has done. And he'll say, I know I'm asking you to state the obvious, but then it should be easy for you to just go over there and say it again, right? Because we can't say it too much. And sometimes restating it and stating the obvious is really important. It helps us to let go, and it helps them to let go, to know that, okay, you do love me, you do care. These things can't be said enough, is what he says, right? And so it's important to state them again. And if you've never said them, say them anyway. And he talks about how absolutely just amazing that some of the things that he has heard on a deathbed, that he'll hear. So say a parent was an alcoholic and was not a very good parent, and or they were very abusive, and he'll hear an adult child say, I'm sorry I wasn't the kid you needed. I'm sorry I was, effeminate, or I'm sorry that you wanted an athlete and I was a mathlete, right? Or I'm sorry, so he would always be amazed at some of the things people said. And he later began to realize that they were choosing freedom from that grudge. They were seeing that person in all their humanity and mistakes and transgressions as mistakes made. And even if that person didn't deserve to be forgiven, he was watching people forgive, right? And so he said, why don't we do this while we're alive? We don't have to wait till someone's dead, right? And to somehow come to this epiphany that that we can let go of these grievances long before there's a deathbed, and is suggesting that we do that. Okay. All right. So the benefits of forgiveness. This study was done by Karen Schwartz. She's a doctor at Johns Hopkins Hospital, and it mimics most other forgiveness in stress management research studies, right? And so studies have found that the act of forgiveness can reap huge rewards for your health. And so they did the, plugging people up to measuring them and doing EKGs and stress tests and all of that, and they found that after forgiveness, it lowers the risk of heart attack. It improves cholesterol levels and sleep. It can reduce pain and blood pressure. It reduces levels of anxiety, depression, and stress. Research points to an increase in the forgiveness health connection as you age. The older we get, right, the more it helps us to practice the art of forgiveness, right? So you can pick up that book, The Art of Forgiveness, by Lewis Smedes. All right, so there is an enormous physical burden to being hurt and disappointed, says Karen Schwartz. She's the director of the Mood Disorders Adult Consultation Clinic at the Johns Hopkins Hospital. Chronic anger puts you into a fight or flight mode, which results in numerous changes in heart rate, blood pressure, and immune response. Those changes then increase the risk of depression, heart disease, and diabetes, among other conditions. Forgiveness, however, calms stress levels, leading to improved health. Okay. All right, so now we're going to get back to that rating scale. And I want you to think about, what you wrote, wherever you were. That 1, I will not pursue forgiveness. What happened is unforgivable. Have we moved closer to 2, right? Can you consider, what can you hope for, right? Can you consider that, what, it might be possible. And now I'm kind of ambivalent. I'm unsure. Number 2, I'm unsure. I'm tired of having the event replay over and over in my head. Have you moved closer to 3? I am considering forgiveness, but I don't know how to do it. And 4, I am ready to forgive, and I plan to take steps toward forgiveness. Again, timing is everything, right? I mean, you have to do it when you are ready and not before. And so I just want you to consider that movement from 1 to 4 is possible. And it may not just happen on its own, right? Sometimes it does, but that epiphany needs our help, right? We, when we're flooded, use some techniques that you learn or that you develop. Write, talk about it, go to groups, see a counselor, maybe some spiritual work if that is something you would like to do. And have you moved from 1 to 4? And can you move from 1 to 4? Okay, next slide. All right. Okay, so all of you are aware that our newsletter is called the Obelisk, right? And it looks like this. Many of you get it through email. And I wanted to bring this up because it has to do with suffering and victories, right? And as survivors and as human beings, we have all of those things, right? So I'm going to read this to you. The obelisk was chosen as a symbol for the lost program to describe the grief process. Emily or Debbie, when was this, who chose this symbol as our logo?
Emily, do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, sure. So the obelisk has been a symbol of the LOST program. We believe, although we can't pinpoint the exact date for you at the moment, in the early 1990s. So although our program has been around
For 42 years or so, I think.
well,
Right.
1979. So I think this would be 43 years this year. Our obelisk newsletter was created between Father Ruby and Therese Gump, who was both a survivor and a clinician who worked with our program, who unfortunately just also passed away last week, although she had a wonderful life lived and leaves behind a beautiful legacy, and we're certainly grateful for her contributions. But the obelisk has clearly become a symbol for those of us in the LOST program. So it is the name of our newsletter. We have a large obelisk represented in our counseling office. Each year when we have our fundraising brunch, our keynote speaker, who is given the Father Charles T. Ruby Award, that is also shaped as an obelisk. And so it's really become a source of, I think, guidance and hope for us in the program as well. It's a really nice
Symbol.
for us
it
to
is.
hold on to and share.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. And the symbol came from the definition of the obelisk, which is a solid, upright, four-sided pillar, gradually tapering as it rises. The original obelisks were erected in Egypt. This is taken from the obelisk, our newsletter. The monuments were constructed by many people working together to pull a single block of granite into place. On the sides of the obelisk, writings were carved into the stone, recording battles and victories of great kings, a permanent testimony to the rulers of Egypt in approximately 1400 BC. The Lost Obelisk contains the writings of survivors and survivor-related issues. This is a record of our struggles, our battle to survive. It represents the support we gain from meeting with other survivors so that we are not alone on our journey of grief. As we gain strength, the grief tapers off. Our spirits rise and we are able to look up again and have hope for the future. All right. So I always love this Chinese proverb. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is today. And so if there is someone you want to forgive, some freedom you want for yourself, some liberation from pain, I hope you'll consider, moving from 1 to 4 on that rating scale I gave you, right? In looking for ways, active ways, to work toward self-compassion and forgiveness as a way of healing, and your own epiphany about, the wider truth, which is not the focus on what we don't have or why doesn't this person love me, but what is the wider truth? There was a time when that person loved me, or there were many years when that person contributed to my life. So it's just an idea, and I hope that I hope you walk away with some some new skills or some new ways of thinking. Again, you don't have to rush this process, but I do invite you to consider forgiveness, and put that in your tool belt, right? So that you can feel lighter and just more at peace. Thank you so much for coming. I've really enjoyed being here with you. Here's the bibliography. I imagine this the recording will eventually go online, and so you're welcome to view it then. But yeah, any of those books are really enjoyable and helpful in your not only your grief journey, but your forgiveness journey. So thank you all. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. To those that are leaving, good night. And I appreciate your being here. All right, any questions or concerns that you have or would like to bring up?
Yes, so if anyone does have questions or comments, feel free to put it in the chat if you like. If anyone would feel more comfortable unmuting themselves and asking a question or giving a comment, that is also just fine. So we'll just wait a couple of minutes to see if anybody puts it in the chat.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
Oh, okay. So one question I can answer is, where can we find the recorded session? And so Lost does have a YouTube channel. And so I will go ahead and put that link in the chat. And so you will be able to view several of our previous presentations. And then this presentation will be up as soon as I can get it downloaded and buffered and all of those good things. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in the chat. That's a link to our YouTube channel. It was also linked in the invitation that you received this evening. You'll find the link further down on the page on that invitation also.
All right, and someone wants the obelisk. Anybody that wants the obelisk, you know, you can write to loss@catholiccharities.net, correct? And request it. We would just need your email.
Yep.
We would need your email. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. All right. I'm not mostly just seeing thank yous coming through in the chat. So thank you all for joining us. I know that Cheryl, I'm sure would also be happy to answer any questions if you got them, to send them through the Lost email. If there's just something that you're thinking about later on this evening, we all know that presentations in group can bring up things a little after the fact. So, if you're at home and just thinking of a few things today, feel free to send us an email and we can always get you connected with Cheryl, and we'll be sure to get the presentation uploaded soon.
Yes, thank you all. I learned from you. And thank you, Emily and Debbie. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
All right. Good night, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording. And again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to us at the program. And thank you so much, Cheryl, for your thoughts today and for this presentation. I know it gives us all a lot to sort of consider in our relationships and in our experiences. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, everybody.